Across most of the animal kingdom, birth is quick and eventless. A chimpanzee often wanders off alone, delivers her infant without help, cleans herself up, and rejoins her group within hours. A newborn foal can stand and walk within half an hour of hitting the ground. Humans are the glaring exception. For nearly all of our history, giving birth has been one of the most physically dangerous events a person could survive. Painful, structurally risky, and almost always requiring help from other people just to get through it alive. That's strange when you think about it. Evolution's whole game is passing genes to the next generation. So why would natural selection saddle our species with a reproductive process this hazardous, right at the exact moment new life enters the world, right? The easy assumption is that human anatomy is just badly engineered. But that's not what the science shows. The danger of childbirth isn't a design flaw. It's the direct consequence of a high-stakes compromise, a kind of biological treaty signed millions of years ago between two competing priorities: the mechanics of how we move and the size of our brains. To understand why that boundary exists, we need to look at the mechanical revolution that separated our ancestors from every other primate on Earth. That revolution was bipedalism. Roughly 4 million years ago, our ancestors came down from the trees and started walking permanently on two legs. Moving upright across the open African savanna turned out to be an incredible survival strategy. It freed up the hands to carry tools and food, reduced the amount of skin surface directly exposed to the blistering midday sun, and let our ancestors travel long distances using a fraction of the metabolic energy required by a four-legged ape. But walking upright didn't come for free. It demanded a total structural overhaul of the pelvis, and nowhere was that overhaul more dramatic than in the pelvis. In four-legged primates, the pelvis is long, flat, and open, creating a wide, straight birth canal that lets a baby pass through with little resistance. To walk upright, though, the human pelvis had to shrink into something short, compact, and bowl-shaped, pulling the hip joints in closer to the body's center of gravity. That made walking and running remarkably efficient, but it also squeezed the internal birth canal into a narrow, twisted bottleneck. For a long stretch of time, that narrower pelvis wasn't a serious problem because our early ancestors still had relatively small brains, not far off of modern chimpanzees. Then, starting around 2 million years ago, the human brain began expanding rapidly, eventually ballooning to roughly 3 times its ancestral size. The cognitive leap that gave us fire, complex tools, language, and the ability to outthink every rival predator. But that sudden growth created a genuine anatomical crisis. Skulls needed to get bigger to house expanding brains, while the pelvis stayed locked in place by the demands of upright walking. Anthropologists call this the obstetric dilemma. Widen the pelvic opening too much and the mechanical leverage needed for efficient walking collapses. Let the infant's head keep growing unchecked, and eventually it becomes too large to pass through the bony pelvis at all. A catastrophe for both mother and baby. Rather than resolving that conflict directly, evolution took a different route. It altered the timeline of human pregnancy itself. Almost every other mammal stays in the womb until its brain is relatively mature. A newborn chimpanzee arrives with a brain already about 40% of its adult size, developed enough to cling to its mother's fur immediately. If a human pregnancy tried to reach that same benchmark, gestation would need to last an almost impossible 21 months, and the fetal skull would end up roughly twice as wide as the pelvis could accommodate. So instead, human infants are born dramatically premature by mammalian standards, with brains only around 28% of their eventual adult size. We are, in a real sense, born as external fetuses, helpless, unable to lift our own heads, sit up, or survive without constant caregiving. That early exit is the only reason a human head can squeeze through the pelvic bottleneck. Even with this early delivery, human birth mechanics remain an extraordinarily difficult puzzle. In chimpanzees, the birth canal is straight and slightly wider than the infant's head, so the baby slides through facing forward, letting the mother easily lift it to her chest. Human birth canal works nothing like that. Reshaped by bipedalism, it actually changes orientation halfway through. Wide side to side at the entrance, wide front to back at the exit. To navigate that shift, the baby performs a sequence of maneuvers found nowhere else in the animal kingdom, known as rotational birth. The head enters sideways, rotates roughly 90 degrees midway through, and exits facing backward, away from the mother. Because of that backward-facing exit, a mother generally cannot safely reach down and guide her own infant out without risking injury to its neck or spine. That single mechanical constraint forced our species to develop a behavior found in no other primate: routine, expected assistance during birth. Throughout most of human history, giving birth safely and alone was rare. Ancestors relied on a cooperative social network, midwives, relatives, and other group members to physically assist with delivery, guide the infant through that final rotation, and clear its airway. Many researchers argue childbirth itself helped drive the evolution of empathy, cooperation, and social bonding as core human traits. The roughly 9-month length of human pregnancy isn't determined by pelvic geometry alone. More recent research points to a second limiting factor: metabolism. A framework known as the energetics, gestation, and growth hypothesis proposes that human pregnancy runs into a hard metabolic ceiling well before the pelvis becomes the deciding constraint. Growing a large, energy-hungry fetus requires an enormous, sustained transfer of calories, oxygen, and nutrients from the mother's body. By around the 9th month mark, the fetus's metabolic demands approach the outer limit of what the placenta can deliver, without pushing the mother's own organ systems toward failure. In this view, 9 months isn't simply the structural limit set by the size of the pelvis. It's also the practical limit of how long a mother's body can sustain that level of physiological output. To make this already difficult passage survivable at all, natural selection built one more workaround directly into human infants: unfused skulls. Human babies are born with their cranial bones still separated from one another, connected only by soft, flexible joints known as fontanelles. During the intense pressure of labor, these individual skull plates are able to shift and slide slightly past each other, temporarily compressing and molding the shape of the baby's head into a narrower, cone-like form, just enough to let it clear the narrow pelvic exit. When you step back, natural selection faced an uncompromising choice while shaping human anatomy. It could have preserved the wide, open, primate-style pelvis that makes childbirth quick and low risk, but that would have meant staying limited to four-legged movement, without the freed-up hands needed for tools, without the efficient long-distance travel, without the reduced heat exposure that upright walking provided. Or it could have kept human brains small and simple, ensuring heads always cleared the birth canal easily. But that would have meant no complex language, no elaborate tool use, no culture, and none of the cognitive advantages that eventually let our species dominate the planet. Instead, evolution pushed for both traits simultaneously, driving the human body to its absolute structural and metabolic limits in the process. We got the mechanical efficiency of upright walking and the extraordinary cognitive power of an oversized brain. And the price for both, paid at once, was a childbirth process that is physically dangerous, mechanically complex, and dependent on outside help to survive. We didn't inherit a broken or poorly designed reproductive system. We inherited a demanding one, built by two of the most powerful adaptations in our evolutionary history colliding inside a single anatomical space. The risk built into human childbirth isn't a flaw to be explained away. It's a kind of permanent record of exactly what it cost our species to walk upright and think the way we do. The vulnerability of how every human being enters the world is, in a very real sense, the price our species paid to inherit the Earth.